I am Gregory Hallows, and this is Preserve Halloween Podcast. So, on the last episode, I mentioned at the end that this episode would be about witches, and that's what it's going to be about. I'm going to do a brief history on witches in pop culture and where they come from and other cultures and things like that. So, um, I wanted to trace the rise in the you know Halloween's one of Halloween's most iconic figures is the witch. But where do they come from? Who are witches? Why are they such a big deal for Halloween? Um that's what we're going to delve into. So let's go. From ancient rites and European witch hunts to modern feminist symbols and candy-fueled costumes, this is more than just a stereotype. Uh, the thing about witches is it's a story of fear, it's a story of power, punishment, and survival. Um, what is a witch? So let's start there. The term witch never had just one meaning, right? In ancient times, witches were healers, they were midwives, they were feared, they were revered. In some cultures, a witch was like the really wise person that kind of lived on the outskirts of a village or of the town. But for a lot of people, they were who got blamed for things dying or when babies got sick or if a crop failed. It was a witch's fault, right? So the word comes from an Old English word meaning the wise one or sorcerer. So it's always had this positive connotation, right? But that's not how witches were treated throughout history. And I believe, and you'll see this throughout the podcast, it's because witches are women, right? Women kind of have a pretty bad rap when it comes to history. But it's important to understand from the very beginning, the witch has always lived in that, space between fear and power. And for some people, jealousy and, like they just want to be them. So in the 1400s through the 1700s, witch panics all across Europe. In Germany, close to 1,000 people were executed at Wurzburg alone. In Scotland, thousands were strangled and burned. In England, one guy, Matthew Hopkins, he claimed that he had over 300 victims. And I say that very adamantly, victims, not nothing positive. And these weren't just random things. Witch trials were used as a means of control. Witch trials targeted women. Witch trials targeted outsiders, elderly, the poor, widowed, anyone who, lived alone or was weird or worked as a healer or something they couldn't understand. You were a witch. The thing is, these women were targeted because they didn't fit the role of wife or mother or servant or any of those typical subservient roles, or they didn't fit the mold of what a man wanted them to. So they were targeted. Salem, of course, is where most people think of when they think of witches. In 1692, Salem, Massachusetts exploded with witch hysteria. People were executed, dozens imprisoned. The Salem witch trials, although historically context was brief, probably the most famous in U.S. history, arguably. And I think you would lose every argument if you said it wasn't. But why? Why did Salem become, the thing you thought of for witch trials? It's because it's kind of a perfect storm, right? Puritan fear, there was political tension, manipulation, teenage manipulation, to be more exact. When you think about Salem now, one of the first things you think of is just the witch city, right? But what's its real legacy? Basically, Salem is a cautionary tale about moral panic, injustice, and, you know, the truth sometimes being manipulated to benefit a certain you know, narrative. So um, there's so much you could talk about in Salem witch trials, and there are so many people that have done wonderful podcasts and books and things like that on Salem witch trials. So definitely visit, but also make sure that, you know, you explore and study the history. But the thing is, you know, witches aren't just definitely not just a US thing. Um in Latin America, there is a specifically Mexico, La Bruja, both feared and respected. Uh she may appear as a fireball, which is awesome. May live in the hills, may cast love spells, may cast curses. For some, she's a healer. In a lot of legends, she's a shape-shifting demon. Uh, so like I guess it's whether you want to love them or hate them. In the Caribbean and Central America, bruja means it can mean witch, it can mean midwife, wise woman, or devil. It just depends on the context of how you use the word. Um, these witches often reflect colonial trauma. They mix indigenous beliefs with Catholic fears, Spanish folklore. You know, folklore is such an amazing topic because just knowing where, you know, these stories come from and what they're based on makes them mean even more. Um, Even today, stories of La Bruja circulate. I mean, I know a lot of people that use it in merchandising. I know a lot of their songs, La Bruja. It's a very very passionate subject. All right, so let's venture off into another culture, African witchcraft and witch accusations there. In parts of sub-Saharan Africa, belief in witchcraft remains widespread. In Ghana, there are witch camps where women, often widows, are sent after being accused by their neighbors. It's crazy that it's still going on. In Nigeria, Pentecostal pastors have staged violent exorcisms for children accused of witchcraft, and a lot of times the idea is that a witch is it's spiritual warfare or social tension or misfortune, or there's some kind of religious aspect. But then there's the Sangoma of South Africa. They believe witches are respected healers who use ancestral guidance. So it's not always negative. So the line between a witch and a healer and a priest is very blurry, but it all comes down to who wields the power, right? Um, and then, so let's go back to the U.S. In the Appalachian Mountains, there's these women that are the granny witches of Appalachia, right? So these women used herbs and charms and rituals passed down through generations to be midwives, folk doctors, spiritual guides, but they weren't called witches. They were, but they're, you know, what they did kind of had the same stigma. So the thing is, it's always goes back to male dominated thinking. When medicine is male and institutional, you know, granny magic is feared and made fun of. And, you know, how many of us, especially us that live in the South, know some, you know, healing thing that your grandparents told you about that doesn't really make any sense, but it works? Like, that's witchcraft, right? But the good thing is, today, a lot of people in Appalachia, they're reclaiming this heritage, and, you know, it's not being mocked. So, witches weren't just burned in Europe and, you know, Salem, which Salem isn't the only place where this happened. Rural America had witch stories, so it's widespread. So how did all of this history and, very tragic history a lot of times become morph into a symbol of a lady in a black hat giving out candy on Halloween, right? Like, where did the shift come? Um, what happened was the 19th century, Halloween shifted from scary to be more fun. We discussed that a little bit on the last podcast with trick or treating. Halloween's more playful. So now witches wore a tall black hat, which they took from Puritan fashion. She flew on a broom, which was, turning domesticity into something kind of dangerous. She always had a black cat because that was the familiar. And, she had to have a familiar. Not always a black cat, though. But, for Halloween purposes, it's a black cat. This wasn't La Bruja. This wasn't The Witch of Endor. Basically, they commercialized witchcraft. And it was very popular. So what next? We know how popular witchcraft or witches are in Halloween, especially, I mean, you see it all the time. And, but before we get into that, there are a ton of, I want to get into this thing. There's artifacts, folklore. I'm skipping around. I apologize. I'm kind of sporadic, but I love this new format I'm doing. In early American England, people would put witch bottles in their walls and they would fill them with hair and nails and urine and whatever to ward off curses. We mentioned familiars just a minute ago. Those could be black cats or toads or owls or whatever. They were thought to be the demonic helper of witches. And in Slavic countries, witches lived in the woods, like almost exclusively. And the reason I kind of shifted focus is I wanted to briefly mention the next podcast is going to be about Baba Yaga, which is one of the most enduring figures. And, it's such a good topic for Slavic folklore. It's reading the description of Baba Yaga is like reading a screenplay for a Studio Ghibli film. She lives in a house that walks on chicken legs. She flies in a mortar and pestle, and sometimes she's helpful, sometimes she's terrifying, but she's always powerful. Like, that's like a tagline for a movie, right? But I'm going to talk about Baba Yaga on the next episode. I just want to briefly mention Baba Yaga. So, and we had a listener write me on social media. His name's Sean McHugh. And he wanted me to make sure I mentioned a very important fact. And this led me to just go nuts on looking up pop culture references and pop culture witch references. He said, I hope you this is reading word for word. I hope you mentioned what an impact the TV show Bewitched had on the image of witches in general, and now, excuse me, how the show kickstarted the witchy tourism in Salem back in 1970. Before those Bewitched episodes, Salem only had the witch house and no other witch-themed attractions or museums, but tourism exploded after Bewitched aired, and it was the same year Laurie Cabot, the official witch of Salem, first opened a shop. He said I probably already know this, and he wanted to run it by me since it was a huge impact the show had on Salem. And of course, there's the Elizabeth Montgomery statue in Salem. I've seen it in person. It's always packed and busy. That was put up in 2005, I believe, by TV Land, and it was to mark the 40th anniversary of the show. So that would have been 20 years ago. So now 60th anniversary of the show. Good Lord. So yes, Bewitched was a huge impact on culture in general for witches. It led to I Dream of Jeannie being created. But the thing was, it kind of mainstreamed witchcraft and witches, and it was also much like X-Men cartoons and things like that. It was a way to talk about civil rights without saying it was civil rights. It was also a way of talking about interracial marriage. It was a way of talking about a lot of topics that you could package in a a white woman package, which sometimes makes it easier to swallow for a lot of people. But Bewitched was definitely inspired by the 1942 movie starring Veronica Lake, which you haven't seen. It's amazing. I Married a Witch, wonderful movie, which was based on a novel called The Passionate Witch, which was published, I think, the year before. So his comment about, thank you, Sean, by the way. His comment, by the way, of Bewitched led me to think about what are all the other really cool references to witches in pop culture. So I started making a list. So, of course, Veronica Lake and I Married a Witch. And then this kind of goes all over the place. Supernatural had Ruby and Rowena. There's, of course, Hocus Pocus, which we all love, Sanderson sisters. Teen Witch, which I wish everyone would watch because it's a really fun movie with Robin Lively. Zelda Rubinstein's in it. Joshua Miller's hilarious in it. And speaking of Bewitched, Dick Sargent is in Teen Witch, one of the Darrens, because there was two, both named Dick. Then, of course, Power Rangers had Rita Repulsa. Teen Titans have Raven. Sabrina the Teenage Witch, both the original show and the comic, but also the new version of Sabrina, which was wonderful. Scary, but wonderful. There's The Good Witch, Practical Magic, which is getting a sequel, which I'm super excited for. There's Grandmama Adams from the Addams Family, the Gorgons in the anime Soul Eater, and also the Mizuna sisters, both from Soul Eater if you're an anime fan. There's the witch, what is her name, Pepe or Pai Pai? I don't know how you say it, but from Freaky Friday, that's where they switch bodies, so that was witchcraft. Agatha Harkness, Scarlet Witch, that's Marvel. The TV show Salem Witches, of course, because it's about Salem. Very fictionalized version, but it's a really good show. If you're an 80s kid like me that grew up watching 80s cartoons, Masters of the Universe had the Sorceress, He-Man. Voltron had Hagar. We had, Charmed, of course. Amy and Willow and Tara from Buffy. The old witch mascot from EC Comics. Do you remember that? What was it? The Haunt of Fear series, I think. Man, there's so many. I've got this crazy list. Wendy, the good little witch from Harvey Comics. You remember her? She was friends with Casper. Zatanna from DC Comics. The Blair Witch Project movie. DuckTales had a witch. Magica Dispel. The Worst Witch. I love that movie with Tim Curry. It's ridiculous, but I love it. Suspiria had the Three Mothers trilogy. So Suspiria was one of them, and then there was two other movies, but it was all the Three Mothers. That show, Penny Dreadful, you remember that? Discovery of Witches is new. That's a great show. Coraline had a witch. Harry Potter, of course. The Descendants, Disney again. Halloween Town, American Horror Story Coven, Beautiful Creatures, Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. I think she was a witch in that, right? Snow White had witches. Witch Hazel from Looney Tunes. Go back way back in the day. Shakespeare had witches. Rosemary's Baby, Harry Potter, I think. Goosebumps, Vampire Diaries. Wizard of Oz introduced the concept of the Good Witch. I don't think there was a good witch until Wizard of Oz. The Hex Girls from Scooby-Doo. Scooby-Doo had witches all over the place. The Craft, of course. Everybody we are the weirdos, mister. Passions, if you were like me and got stuck at your grandma's house in the summer and had to watch her stories, you may have seen Passions. Passions had the Bennetts, Grace and Kay, I think. Witches. Dark Shadows, like old school. Great show, Angelique from Dark Shadows, witch. Now, one of the most popular movies in the world these past few years, Wicked. Witches have always been around pop culture, which is amazing. The depiction of them and how they were portrayed has changed some, but witches have been around forever, and they're going to keep being around. So what is the witch today? Let's circle back. The witch has been reclaimed by pop culture. There is, it's. I guess women are claiming witchcraft and not taking it as a negative. There's a saying called, I think, Hex the Patriarchy. Some people still think witchcraft's evil. Others see it as a symbol of female power, intuition, and rebellion. Um, witches are no longer burned. They're celebrated at festivals, and we see them all the time at Halloween. They're honored in spiritual circles. I think you can talk about witchcraft now more without being stigmatized. I mean, there's always going to be people that think it's devil worship or especially there's always going to be negative people. But the thing about it is the history of witches and witchcraft is amazing. Um, Basically, if you boil it down to the most basic idea, the story of the witch is a story of what happens when society fears people who step outside of the role that they're supposed to have, especially women. And on Halloween, when you dress up as something you fear or something you desire, that's when it's a perfect night to remember witches, right? Or celebrate them. So that's what we do. Witches will always be a symbol of Halloween, I believe. Um, and so if you see a witch on a greeting card, if you see, the witch costume at the shop, if you see a kid dressed up and they're doing the stereotypical green face, there's that scene in Buffy where Willow sees the little girl right after she says, "Man, I wish they." I don't know. I'm paraphrasing, but basically, if I see another, depiction of the witch as the, green face and the wart, I'm gonna lose my mind. And then the little girl dressed up exactly like she just said, and she loses her mind, but in a good way, how cute she was. So there's always going to be a kid that wants to dress up like a witch. But you got to remember, um, when you see all this stuff, it's a reflection of centuries of fear, centuries of folklore, a transformation, a fight for power. And from La Bruja to Salem, now TikTok, because isn't there like a witch talk, I think? The witch will endure. The witch will always be around. The witch is not just a symbol of Halloween. It's a symbol of what society decides to punish. And sometimes, a lot of times, what that same society also secretly admires and wishes it could be. So what are we going to talk about next time? I mentioned it earlier. Next podcast, we're going to talk about Baba Yaga. I'm so excited. But like I said, I've changed my little catchphrase a little towards the end. So until next time, stay strange, stay curious, stay spooky, and preserve Halloween.